Well, thank you all once again for coming this afternoon. My name is Tim Turnus, and I'm the director of this thing called the St. John's Bible. Before all of this, with all our masks and all that good social distancing, it was very common for me to be flying coast to coast, border to border, to Canada, United Kingdom, with this thing called the St. John's Bible. Trust me, my carry-on luggage is bigger than yours as we go all the way through. And it's kind of unique to be here because today I had to make sure my shirt and pants actually matched. I haven't had to worry about that for a long time. I had to put shoes on for the first time in a long time. And it's just fun to see real people in front of me. The last time I had a live audience was in London on March 8th, when I had about 70 members of a Royal Guild of Calligraphers of some sort. And they were just, as you can imagine, drooling over everything that I had to say and enjoyed it. And then all of this hit. And here we are, finding different ways to share this as well. So thanks for coming today. And our goal today is to help you understand how you can share this book with others. Because the most common thing that I see happening when people get this book is the following. You'll get someone coming in, you'll say, okay, come here. Let me turn the pages and let me tell you about the art. Isn't this wonderful? Let me tell you what it means. Let me look at this and let me show you this. Isn't this wonderful? Let me tell you the story of this. And that's a very common way to interact with a book like this. It's a common way to interact with art. We want people to tell us, we want people to show us what it's about. But my approach is very different. The approach that I take on is not about the book becoming mine and a way for me to share it, but finding ways to help you unpack the book. Because if I can help you unpack the book as a docent, then the book becomes yours. Otherwise, it's always my story to tell, and the next time you tell it, you're trying to, what did Tim say? Because I want to make sure I tell it just like he did, as opposed to, this now becomes our story. And so our time together today is to help us understand how we could do that. Now, do you notice something when you came in? I have the books all set up, and they're all displayed. What are your comments that you have about what you're seeing, how I have it set up? Any observations?
They're open.
Yes.
So approachable.
Okay. That's a great word because you're stepping into the next level of what we're going to do next. But remember that word approachable. What else do you notice about how I have them set up? You noticed it right away.
I did?
Yes. Or maybe it was you. It was you. I'm sorry, I got me.
We look alike.
Yeah. What did you say when you? You do today. Everyone looks alike today. What did you notice when you walked in?
There were no illuminations showing.
Yeah. Whenever I share the St. John's Bible, I never have it open to an illumination. In fact, it might, and sometimes I've been known to share the St. John's Bible and never show an illumination. Can you imagine that? Yeah. And so that's how we're going to start today. But you'll also notice I also almost always start with all the books closed. Or if I have my book, I have one book, I always have it closed. So let's begin today with our conversation about looking at the closed book. Just looking at this thing, you walking in, what words come to mind? When you look at this thing, we can close, remember where I had that, we can close a couple of them. What strikes you? What does this closed book say?
I see special and fancy.
Okay, good. What else?
Handmade with love.
Okay, now you might not know it's handmade, but you could say, oh, but yes, but it looks like it's, you use the word love. There's been some care taken to this. What else do you notice when you see this? What strikes you?
It's a big book.
It's big, yes, exactly. That's always the first thing people say is, oh my gosh, it's a big book. So why is it a big book? What does a big book say?
Important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what else does it say?
It's got a lot to say.
A lot of information.
A lot of information, there's a lot to say. What else does it want you to do?
Come read me.
Yes, everything about this says, you gotta come look at me. Everything about this is big. What if you walked in, and that's what you saw? It's very different, isn't it? What's the purpose of this book?
Meet Jesus.
Okay, yeah, but there's a big difference between this book and this book. What's the purpose of this book?
It's for an individual to read or study?
Yeah. Everything about this may say, open me, may say me read me, but everything about this is individual. Everything about this says, this is mine. There's not one thing here in the structure itself that says, come on, let's all gather around this. If it's sitting there, I mean, have you ever stayed in a hotel room? There's one of these in almost any hotel room. How many of you pick this up when you go in there? Exactly. I mean, maybe you have. I'm sure people have, but it doesn't invite you to do that. What does this book say about who it's for?
Group viewing.
That's exactly right. Everything about this gets to the primary reason the St. John's Bible was done. Everything about this reminds us that the Bible is communal. It's meant to be shared. And therefore, we have a structure that says, this is for everyone. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with this at all. But this is yours. And in fact, you can take this and it becomes yours in a very personal way, which also changes how you can interact with it. There's no way you're going to walk around with this thing cuddled up in your arms. You're not going to cuddle this together when you go to bed. Everything about this says this is designed for a community. It's a communal experience. The Word, by its very nature, is communal. And when we did the St. John's Bible, that's why it was done. It was meant to be a communal invitation into the Word. The artworks in the St. John's Bible, the pages in the St. John's Bible are designed to say, come on. There's so much in here, there's no possible way you can figure it out by yourself. You need a community. The artworks are designed to say, you got to have questions. Because if you have questions, you're going to have a discussion. And a discussion is the foundation of community. In fact, you can't have a community if you can't discuss. Think about that. Without discussion, you have no community. You just have people standing side by side, or even 6 feet apart. So everything that I do when I share the St. John's Bible is about the communal nature of the Word. And therefore, the structure represents that. And you talked about being made with love. You talked about approachability. When the St. John's Bible was done, it was done with this idea of quality, longevity, forward thinking, and community. And those 4 words become so much of what I talk about and how I share the St. John's Bible with others. I want you to have a quality experience that you're going to take with you and remember for a long time about something that is designed to be communal in nature, but at the same time allows you to think about now and bring it into the future. If you go to our campus, you're going to see the Abbey Church, and the Abbey Church does that exact same thing. It's a building that was based on quality, longevity, forward thinking, and the idea of community. So I always begin with the book closed. And I ask my guests, what does the physical thing talk about? And then they almost always come with what you just said, and they define the reason why we did it. They can answer that on their own. But then, of course, you always can't wait to get what's inside. And you notice that I had the book set up in a very specific way. And that was because I wanted you to take a look at the bulk of the St. John's Bible. People forget that out of 1,130-some pages, only about 160 of them have artwork. Only about 14% of the whole project is art. But actually, 100% of the project is art because every one of these pages is beautiful and is an artwork in itself. So I'm going to ask you to come on up here and take a look at the pages that are open. And go through and just read a few lines, go from page to page, and think about not what you're reading, but actually what it looks like. And any comments you have about the script itself. Because we can spend a whole day just talking about the words in front of you. So just read a few lines. And then go to different page to page to page and move around a little bit. Yeah, you can touch them. I'd ask you not to turn pages yet because I have them rigged. I have them rigged for a certain reason. But just go, you do have to move from page to page to kind of look at some different pages as well. Let's see what we have here, wisdom books. I'll open that one up now. Any observations about the script?
Interesting little symbols that have some meaning.
Yeah.
That are not really explained on the pages I'm looking at.
Ah, good point. Yeah, they're not physically explained, but if you did some studying, you could easily figure out what they represent. So what else do you notice about the script itself?
It's different from book to book.
Ah, why do you think causes that?
different person.
Yeah, that's right. You have 6 different calligraphers that worked in the St. John's Bible, which makes it unique. But do you notice something as you go from open page to open pages? How's the readability?
Good.
Yeah, it's
Nice to read.
yeah, you know, it really is. She said it's very nice to read. What else do you notice?
There's a template of some sort. There are 4 columns, annotations, and headings. So there's a structure that.
A lot of work, a lot of thought, a lot of structure went into making these pages as well. What do you notice as you go from page to page about the readability? Any observations?
For me, it takes some time to adjust my eyes to the new readability,
Yeah. You are not reading a mechanical text, okay? It's going to take some adjustment, but once you've adjusted to the style, is it easy to read, hard to read?
It's pretty
Well, for-
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most people talk about how easy it is to read. It's incredibly legible as you go all the way through. And I have people spend some time. Now, can you tell me where one calligrapher ends and a new one starts? No. You can't?
I noticed size was different for a few lines.
Okay, yep. Now that might be, you will notice that there are some lines that are slightly smaller or slightly larger. That could be the difference between prose and poetry. You might see differences in lines. Like if you look here in the wisdom books, you'll see it has a nice blending of text and scripts as well. So there are going to be variations in size and text. What else do you notice about the pages as you go, and the scribes when they begin and end?
Interesting footnotes that are added on the side, and they obviously relate to something in the text.
Exactly. If your page has a footnote, I bet you can look at that footnote and find a small letter and find its correlation in the body of the text as well. The footnotes for the St. John's Bible all come from the translation, and they give us an idea of difference in translations, different debates between different translators and so on. And they go to the little footnotes all the way through. As you look at this, you should be able to tell the difference between the calligraphers because they're not written by a machine. As the scribes talk about, they talk about how every letter starts in the toes and comes out the fingers. They talk about that it's an entire body experience. Now, the remarkable thing about this as you look through, you should notice how the readability is consistent throughout the entire book. If you took up a book and start paging pages and look at it from page to page, it's remarkable how the script stays very consistent. However, most likely it was written by one of 6 different people. To hide the fact that the scribes were different, any 2 pages open next to each other are always the same calligrapher. So if you want to know where a calligrapher ends, turn the page, and there's a chance he or she may not. Now, here's your test. Go to a book, study that line, and look at the bottom, and then turn the page. Can you tell? Is it the same calligrapher, or has the calligrapher continued? And tell me what you're looking at when you do that.
Different.
What do you say? You said different. What are you basing that on?
Each letter has a little scroll to it
Okay.
on the second page versus the first.
Ah, so she's suggesting look at the scrolls, look at the flourishes, the tails. Because there are 2 things a calligrapher can't match, and that's how he or she lifts his pen off the page, so they don't even try. If you look at the bottom line, just go across the bottom line across all 6 or 7 of these open books, you'll notice that the tails are different. Okay? Yeah, very much so. And that's the first dead giveaway. And the second dead giveaway is if I gave you a pen and I said, could you match the way somebody else writes? The one thing you'd have trouble matching, you may get form, you may get block, you may get design, but you'd have an almost impossible chance of matching pressure.
Was there an effort to take the 6 of them and have the same style?
Can you answer his question? Take a look at these pages. Look at the double pages across the volumes. Has there been an attempt to make the style similar? Yes, very much so. Very much so. If you look from book to book, the style is always identical. And you just found, if you listen to what I just did, you'll notice I modeled something I do all the time. When a question is asked, where does the answer go? Who does it go to? It goes to you for answering. Look in front of you. We're so commonly think, let me tell you about it. Well, you might have to, but you also want to give the audience a time to play and interact with these as well and turn the pages. I had these open specifically to six different open spreads, one for each of the 6 different calligraphers. What you saw in front of you was written by 6 different people all together as you go all the way through. And as you turn the page, there's a good chance it was the same calligrapher, but there's also a good chance that it wasn't, because it's the 2 open faces that always have to meet each other. So.
It really struck me because one of the first times I saw the Bible, it was under protective material. And the experience of it when you just said, touch it, turn the pages. I just love it because it is also the way those words should also be approached.
That's
Your
right.
life, get into it. Don't stand back and, think of it as interesting prose. So that was really exciting to see people.
And there you've hit on the main reason you want to figure out a way to share this with people that's interactive. Because what's the most common thing you hear about the Word of God? It's the living Word. But yet we so much want people to tell us what it means. And we get terrified when the meaning starts to change. Well, if you're alive, you're going to change. If you don't change, you're not alive. That's part of our process of going from birth to death. The Word itself is going to change. And when you look at it and interact with a group today, it's going to have some meaning. When you do it tomorrow, you've changed, your group has changed, and how you see this is going to change. When I talk about artworks that I've talked about for 15 years, today, in the world of coronavirus, it's vastly different than the interpretations we get 14 years ago. And so it's that ability to come and interact that really makes it transformative. And that's what you want to capture and figure out a way to do. So let's figure out how we can do that. One of the most common things I see when I see people sharing the book is they doing exactly what I'm doing right now. They page through it and find the pretty picture to open it up right away, okay? And show. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but again, you lose that kind of that aha moment. We're considering opening up the book this way. This is the gospel book, okay? The gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, think, when they did this book, it was actually the very first book that they did. They had to find a way to open it. Well, what's the opening of the Gospel of Matthew? What story is that? Does anybody know?
It's this begat this, begat
Yes,
this, begat.
it's the begat. It's the genealogy. It is the most boring passage in the Bible. Come on, folks. It's this list of who had who and how they were related all the way through. It's a very important passage in the Bible, but it's a list of names. The St. John's Bible works very hard to not make a picture book, but their goal is to create an experience that invites you in for this conversation. A list of names, you would think, there's not much to talk about. I mean, you can't debate or talk about who my mother was. I mean, that's who it was. Likewise, well, how do you take and make a list of names that invites people to look into them and get to the meaning of that list of names? So if you were going to be given a list of names, what would you do with it? Now, I know some of you know what this looks like. So it's hard to think beyond that. That's why if you have a group that doesn't know it, then it's like, oh, how could this possibly be? And I set it up that way, and then what do? We have some conversation, and it's at that point that I say, well, let's take a look at how it was handled in the St. John's Bible. Now, what's the difference of what I just did? Yeah, you may go, ooh, when you see it behind, by opening it, but what happens when you do what I just did? starting with it like this, and talking about it first, what happens when this happens?
Your imagination starts to work.
And what do you start doing as a viewer?
I'm trying to create a picture of the relationships in my head.
That's right. And when you come and look at this, what are you looking for?
Those relationships?
Yes, and is what I saw
Yeah.
in my mind on the page?
Yeah.
Or this is, so immediately you have gone from passive viewing to active viewing before you've even looked at the page. And I almost never open a page with just saying, here it is, okay? Without that first, let's think about it first, okay? So now, then I would invite people to come closer and take a look. Instead of me telling you what this is, in fact, well, that'll be a different technique I'll show down the road. But I would invite then guests to talk about this and to pull out what they see. And you could do that too. You can talk, of course, all the different types of things as well. And then in my mind, I also think, what could I compare this to later on? Because you want to create an experience where you go back and forth, because if it's going to be a living word, you want them to make connections as you go all the way through. So previewing an artwork like this is very common. That's one of the things I do all the time. I'm looking at a book. Okay, let's take a look at another work. There it is. Of course, I closed it now. Sorry about that. I got to open to my page. This technique is going to be a little different. As I'm looking at this one, I'm going to open the page and show it to you first. Now I'm going to open this page and show you this work of art, and I want you to stand here in complete silence and just look at it. Don't talk to your neighbor. Just look at it and ask yourself, what do you see? You probably have to come a little bit closer because we're actually going to do this time. So here, just look at this work and just let your eyes pour over it. And ask yourself, what do you see? What words start to come to mind as you look at this?
Darkness?
Yeah, very much so. What else do you see?
It reminds me of the graffiti on Lake Street.
Oh, why? Now unpack that for us.
Well, that image is a lot like the figures and the people that are painted on Lake Street, near George Floyd's murder.
Oh, okay. Does that have an element of darkness to you? Does that, okay, so interesting. Oh, you said, yeah, very much so, okay. Well, let's.
To that, there's some modernistic use of ancient.
Yeah, very much so. So she's just saying it's a modern use of an ancient text. It gives a context to it. So let's take a look at this artwork in the George Floyd era. What words come to mind?
It's really troublesome. The dark tones, it's troublesome.
Yeah. Darkness, troublesome.
Agony.
Oh, yeah, very much so. What else do you see?
I see the gold, though.
Oh, okay, look, but there is some golden color in here. Oh, interesting that but fascinating.
And hope was
Sure.
definitely what I felt.
Yeah, and do you see any glimmers of hope when you go down Lake Street now and you see that graffiti? I don't know, I'm asking.
Yeah. It's both.
Yes,
It's both.
is there hope in darkness? Yeah, there can be. If there's darkness, like I always think at nighttime, I know it's going to get lighter in the morning. There's that hope as well. What would you title this?
It could be as simple as hope out of darkness.
There you go. That would be a nice encapsulation of your conversation. Anything else?
Alone in a troubled world.
Ooh. But could you have a conversation about that topic right there as well? Are there any, when you look at this passage, and there we go. When you look at this artwork, are there any words of scripture that come to mind?
Well, I know this isn't Psalms because you put that away.
Yeah.
But Valley of Death.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that could even be a title. And you could put the valley. And what's beautiful about the Valley of Death? If you know that passage?
though I walk through the valley of death.
though I walk through, there is still hope. I mean, it's really what it is. It's a hopeful passage. Any other scriptural words you could put with this?
I see John 3:16. The Lord gave his only son. He so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. That is the lamb, that is the son, that is...
And if you look, there is a little bit of lamb's head down here, or a ram's head. And that's that whole idea of sacrifice. And do we need to sacrifice a little bit to get some hope out of the darkness? Do you see what I'm doing? What have I done with this particular artwork and the way I've done this conversation with you?
You let us talk about this versus you telling us what it means.
Right. Do you need to know what passage this is?
No.
No, you don't. Do you want to know? Yes. Sure. Okay. Simple as that. People always want to say, I will, but I almost always ask after a discussion, and again, we're truncating everything this afternoon. I would never do this haphazardly like this, but we're truncating things to get you to get an example. Almost every time I have a rich discussion like that, I will always ask, now would you like me to tell you more about this? And I guarantee you, not quite half, but almost 50% of the time, people will say, no, I'm fine. Because they really don't, because it has become theirs. Now, this is the suffering servant. But, you know, lo, how I walk through the valley of death, the only begotten son, those are just as rich. Don't box yourself into, this is only this passage, because then what does this become? It becomes a picture book. I'm going to quickly tell you about the creation page that we can use what we know for a different activity, okay? As people look at this, they often see darkness into light, order, or chaos into order. They see this literally as the telling of the story, 7 slices, 1 slice for each day, beginning with a big burst of energy. Ancient Hebrew down here reading tohu vabohu, that idea of formless void, nothingness. Out of the darkness comes light. The thin band of gold shattering the darkness, saying almost, let it begin. Mathematical fractals that create an underlying sense of scientific order within the chaos. Then you have the idea of the heavens and the seas being created, the separation of the land and the sea, and a satellite image of the Ganges River Delta, the sun to rule by day, the moon to rule by night, and all the stars in between, and satellite imagery showing that not satellite image, orbital imagery that show that we revolve around the sun, not the other way around. Then you have this idea of the birds and the fish and other creatures being born or being brought to life, and we have this image of this dark, dark bird. Could it be a raven? Could it be the shadow of something hovering above us? Could it be a dove? Whatever. But something is guiding and leading us forward to this creation of human beings, in which we have one of the most important figures here, this image of a huntress who comes from a cave painting in Nigeria, one of the oldest images of a woman we have on the planet. And she graces the big opening pages of the St. John's Bible, paired with other traditional human beings, with a little troublemaker down there, a snake, a hint of what's to come. And then you'll notice how it gives way to everything on this solid band of gold and this solid structure. The messy line over here, the chaotic line here, gives way to these ordered, very staid bands. But then I always ask the question, where is God? Because one of the challenges you have in making a Bible with pictures is how do you image the divine? If you were going to be asked to keep your job, to keep your status in life or whatever, you had to come up with the perfect way to make a picture of God in the modern world. How would you do it? Whose face would you use? And that, of course, is a whole big discussion that you have as well. But in the St. John's Bible, we chose to use gold. Gold to represent God and the divine. And there's a whole way I get to that point with an audience. But you'll notice that the only thing that is constant all the way through this artwork is the gold. But now, with what we've talked about here, we can now use this to unpack other artworks. And so one technique I will often do is I will teach about one artwork in the whole collection. And then we will use what we discuss here, and I will typically not do it in 30 seconds like I just did. And we will use that to unpack future artworks in the St. John's Bible. And so pick up on what your audience says, because the minute you do that, you're going to start to multiply what they say. Okay. Now let's pretend we had a great discussion about this and we understand about the gold and how the artworks are going. And then I'm going to ask you, now, based on what you've seen here about how creation was handled, a story that so many people know. I mean, almost everyone knows the creation story. Even if you've never read the Bible, the Torah, or the Quran, I bet you know parts of the creation story. It's such a part of popular culture. Well, another passage in the first part of the Bible that almost everyone is familiar with, even if they don't know it or believe it, is the Ten Commandments. Now, what would you do with a pile of words, a pile of laws? How would you show the Ten Commandments in a way that weaves it in and lets it be interpreted? Stand there and think. What would your Ten Commandments look like? Now pretend we've had some time. Turn to the person next to you and have a conversation about that. What would you do with the Ten Commandments? So the three of you can do it together.
What would you do? You're at a disadvantage because you already know what it looks like.
No, I don't. I don't.
Oh. I think if you were going to do it, I would do it like in hieroglyphs, like the handicapped somehow do.
The text and then just and have pictures of people acting it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. And I just have this image, this sound in my head that keeps saying the greatest of these is love. So how does love?
Okay, if we had more time, I would encourage you to do that. So what I would do is, what did you see? What did you envision? Let's go. I'm going to point because I overheard what you said. You said something that just triggered my mind. What did you say right away?
Well, I can't get past, Moses holding the two.
Yeah, sure.
But you have to. And you're going to have that. People are going to come with the images they've seen forever. Okay?
Sure.
So what? Now, and again, this is hard because I know you've seen it and you've seen it. So it's hard when you have an audience that knows what it looks like. But if you didn't, what could you do with the Ten Commandments that would bring them into the modern world, but still keep them the Ten Commandments? We're not changing Scripture. And what's going to happen now after we have the conversation? What are you going to do? You can't wait to what?
See it.
Yeah, you can't wait to see what's been done with this passageway as well.
Right.
Okay. So
Shall we go in there now?
yes, we because he's still thinking, I can't get past this. But that's the technique. You teach them, and then you start leading in. It's a variation on what we did over here, but you're doing it based on knowledge and based on an experience of what they've encountered in the project already. Because obviously it's going to have what? Gold. Because the Ten Commandments are for us. God doesn't need them. They're for us. And so somehow we've got to get in there. So how is that going to happen? And then after we have that discussion, is your looking at the page going to be vastly different? Because then I would go, aha, and I would open this up and invite you to look at the Ten Commandments. And if you notice where my other hand is right now, what's it? Because now we're going to say, well, how do these compare? What do you see here that was carried over here? Do you see the chaos? Do you see the chaos? Mm-hmm. Do you see the going to darkness to light? Do you see the gold and filtering it in? And you can have a whole conversation just going back and forth between the two artworks based on the conversation we had here. And does that dramatically change how you're going to interact with that artwork? And even if all you did was just those two in a 10-minute period, they're going to go away. I can't wait to see what's in the rest of these pages. Okay? Because that's very good, very clear. And once you know the St. John's Bible really well, and you know where pieces are, you can say, you know what? We've learned this one. Let's take a look over here and compare it with this one now as well. Because here we have the word becomes, law becomes the word. Well, how does the word look when it becomes flesh? And then do you know where I'm going? To John. That kind of idea. So you want to find ways to weave it through and bring it all the way through. Okay. Questions?
Many.
Well, and think about what I had you do as an audience. I asked a question, I had you think, and then what was the next thing I had you do? Pair. Yeah. Then we would, of course, share. I taught elementary school for 17 years, can you tell? And whenever my class was disruptive, not that you were misbehaving, we would go to what's called think, pair, share, because it dramatically changed the focus. And what happens in the sharing stage? What did I do?
You listened in so you could pull.
Exactly. So if you were all going to be dead for a few seconds, I say, I know what you said, and you're going to start the conversation for us. I'm going to pull you in. Your job as the page turner is much more than the page turner. Your job is to turn them. Because it's and again, we're leaving out the conversation here as well, because I'm trying to just move through some different activities.
It also, because I'm a retreat director, it also immediately puts energy into the room, and you as the speaker ride the energy. If it's dead, it's like talk to each other.
That's exactly right.
And then whoop, goes way up.
Yep. Whenever I'm doing an audience of, and I've had audiences from 5 to about 5,000. In California, I had an audience of 5,000, okay? And I was on a Jumbotron. Quite a different experience, okay? And you start talking and you realize, okay, you've got an audience in front of you that has been listening to you talk for 20 minutes. You need to re-energize. Put up an artwork, think about it, turn to the person next to you, and the whole dynamic of the room changes. And yes, you'll have 1 or 2 people that talk about the weather, but most often they're going to talk about what you've done. And then you bring it back in, and you're amazed. It's amazing how different your conversation begins. Okay? So, just to kind of reiterate, 3 very specific techniques. Previewing a page. I mean, you're going to obviously open the book and turn the page and show things like that. But at some point in time, if I'm turning the pages in a book, let's say I'm going through and turning pages, and I've talked about, you know, all these different pages here. Here's a section that if you have 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you could do this. If I have a group that's here, we just need to see the Bible for 10 minutes, I quickly grab the gospel book and I turn to Mark. And here's why. By looking at Mark, I can talk about a frontispiece. I can talk about 3 levels of text: introductory text, standard text, and footnotes. I can show people what happens when you make a mistake and they leave out a line and you can add it back in. I can talk about contemporary art. I can talk about traditional art. I can talk about, traditional art. I can talk about traditional art. I can talk about traditional art with a twist, okay? Because here Jesus is in his jeans and a sweatshirt, okay? And so there's different elements. And then I can turn the page and I have text, and then I can stop and I can say, imagine now, after you've seen these artworks, being given the passage for the loaves and the fishes. And we have a conversation about what that passage is about, and the fact that we didn't want to simply make it a picture of Jesus on the hillside preaching, because that's not what it was about. And so we lead that up, and we have our discussion that we've modeled before, and we preview it, and then we say, here's our loaves and fishes. What do you see? And I can close this, and in about 10 minutes, I have gotten just this wonderful little package that really encapsulates the entire Bible project as well.